When we consider the archaeological sites across Israel today, none are more impressive than the remains of ancient structures built under the auspices of King Herod the Great. With the aid of his Roman allies, Herod conquered the land of Israel, including Jerusalem, and established himself as king in the year 37 BCE, according to Josephus's reckoning. Herod has been described posthumously as a manic depressive, paranoid schizophrenic with aggressive tendencies. In his manic state, he built some of the grandest structures on earth in his day. Almost immediately on rising to power, he constructed a series of fortresses along his eastern border, not only as a defense against Nabatean Arabs, but to control his own people. There was Alexandrium and Cyprus, named after his mother, and built overlooking Jericho and guarding the road to Jerusalem. East of the Dead Sea was the fortress Machaerus, where in tradition John the Baptist was executed. Herod also took over a previous fortress called the Hyrcania and put it to use for the imprisonment of troublemakers. In the year 20 BCE, Herod ordered a construction unlike any other, named after himself, Herodian. It was built into a hill near Bethlehem, the top of which was flattened, then built even higher with stone from a nearby hill. Earth was then piled up against the walls to produce a steep incline. It was fortified by 3 semicircular towers, as well as a very tall, round tower, which likely housed heavy catapults. The palace area was accessed through an underground passage with 200 steps ascending from below. Inside was a colonnaded court, a synagogue, and a bath complex with hypocaust heating system. Documents from the Jewish historian Flavius Josephus suggest Herod was buried at the Herodium, thronged by an entire army and a massive funerary procession. But Herod's exact burial place remained a mystery for thousands of years. Then, in 2007, Israeli archaeologist Ehud Netzer announced he had in fact discovered Herod's tomb. The tomb was a 32-foot square structure building with a pointy roof and 3 coffins. One of these, intricately carved in red stone, was alleged to be the tomb of the great king. Sadly, Netzer died in 2010 in a fall not far from the excavation site. But subsequently, 2 archaeologists from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, Joseph Patrich and his colleague Benjamin Arubas, claimed that the tomb wasn't Herod's at all. The rather modest structure was too small for Herod to have envisioned for himself, and the poor planning and design wouldn't have suited him. The building was an awkward layout, and the coffins in the tomb were made of local limestone and red stone, not the elaborate marble or even gold that would have suited Herod's tastes. But if the tomb isn't Herod's, whose is it? Perhaps his close family members, such as his mother, father, or brother. Bottom line, the great king's exact whereabouts remains a mystery, though there are many parts of the complex that have yet to be excavated. But Herod's reign was about much more than fortresses. He built up the Cave of the Patriarchs in Hebron with massive limestone altars where Abraham and Sarah, Isaac and Rebekah, and Jacob and Leah were believed to rest. Dating back over 2,000 years, the monumental Herodian compound, which today houses a mosque, is considered the oldest continuously used intact prayer structure in the world. Herod was also intent on building entire cities, no matter the cost or the slave labor that would inevitably be involved. The most famous of these was the port of Caesarea, nestled along the Mediterranean coast and begun in the year 22 BCE. Josephus describes it. At Caesarea, he constructed a major port along the shore where there was none, enclosing a harbor larger than Piraeus. Then he erected a whole city of white stone, crowned with the temple to Rome and Augustus, all within a 12-year period. Caesarea now also boasted a theater, an amphitheater, and a subterranean sewer system which automatically flushed itself with the sea tides. What Josephus doesn't mention is that the imposing artificial harbor was fashioned using the Roman innovation of hydraulic concrete. The remains of the harbor have long ago sunk beneath the Mediterranean, but divers have gone down to examine its footings. They discovered the base of an enormous tower that guarded the harbor entrance and that may have been a lighthouse. In 1982, they discovered various wooden frames into which the concrete had been poured and left to set underwater. Not far from shore was a hippodrome where chariot races were conducted. Another prominent feature of the city was Herod's palace, which was faced with special white marble imported from abroad. After Herod's death, it was used as the headquarters of the Roman governor, including Pontius Pilate. One slab of limestone, later reused as part of a staircase, bears Latin letters that are clearly legible. VS, the end of the name Pontius, and Pilatus. From the inscription, we can be sure that Pilate was not only a procurator, but a Roman prefect. As with any Greco-Roman town, an aqueduct was an essential element, channeling a steady stream of water from springs many miles to the north. During the following century, a second aqueduct was built by the legions of the Emperor Hadrian. We should also note that there was a small Jewish quarter at the northern end of the city, where the earlier town of Strato's Tower had been located. Caesarea would become a flashpoint of what would later erupt in the year 66 CE as the Great Jewish Revolt against Rome. But for all the splendor of Herod's building spree, his most spectacular projects were in Jerusalem itself, the centerpiece of which was the Holy Temple. Work began in the year 20 BCE. In the 18th year of his reign, Herod started to enlarge and reconstruct the temple at his own expense, which he knew would be his greatest enterprise. After removing the old foundations, he laid new ones and raised the structure of hard, white stones. Purple hangings covered the entrances, and a golden vine with grape clusters adorned the area below the corners. Large porticos with 162 Corinthian columns surrounded the temple, which was supported by walls of unparalleled size. Beyond the first court was a second, surrounded by a stone balustrade with an inscription prohibiting foreigners from entering on penalty of death. Bearing out Josephus's words, we have a stone inscription in Greek discovered in 1871, reading, "No foreigner is to enter within the balustrade and enclosure around the temple area. Whoever is caught will have himself to blame for his death, which will follow." The shrine itself was completed in just 1.5 years, but the massive outer courtyard with its rows of colonnades continued for decades. The entire complex rested upon an enormous artificial platform supported by multiple rows of subterranean vaults, which effectively extended the original hill, identified in Solomon's day as Mount Moriah. This new Court of the Gentiles, as it was called, covered an area of some 480 by 300 meters. The external supporting walls, 5 meters thick, are still visible today. Archaeologically, it's easy to spot Herodian ashlars by their massive size and by the distinctive beveled edges that make the rectangular center section of each block extend forward. Josephus also mentions a great fortress at one end of the temple courtyards. At the northwestern corner of the temple enclave stood the citadel, but Herod called it the Antonia to honor his friend. Here, the high priest's robe was kept, which was worn only when he offered sacrifice. Among the important archaeological features of the Temple Mount compound, we have the Western Wall, the holiest place in all of Judaism, as it represents the portion of the retaining wall closest to the spot where it has long been believed the temple once stood. As an interesting bit of modern archaeology, a number of coins discovered beneath the foundation of the Western Wall suggest that Herod the Great did not even come close to completing construction on the Temple Mount compound. The coins were stamped around 17 CE with the name of the Roman proconsul Valerius Gratus, some 2 decades after Herod's death. The finds tend to confirm the account of the Jewish historian Flavius Josephus that the entire complex was only completed during the reign of Herod's great-grandson, Agrippa II, probably around 50 CE. Underground excavations have also opened a 600-meter-long drainage channel connecting the Jerusalem archaeological garden near the Western Wall with the Siloam Pool in the city of David. Then there's Wilson's Arch, which once supported a bridge between the upper city and the Herodian Temple Mount. Its remains can be seen in a subterranean extension of the Western Wall to the north of the exposed area. Another tunnel, opened only decades ago, follows the entire length of the wall, allowing access to an additional 485 meters, or 1,591 feet of the wall. There's also Robinson's Arch, named after scholar and archaeologist Edward Robinson, who identified its remains in 1838. It once helped support a monumental staircase up to the southwestern corner of the Herodian Temple Mount. Robinson believed he had identified the eastern edge of a bridge that linked the temple compound with the upper city. Charles Warren, during his investigations of 1867 to 1870, noted the presence of a large pier to the west of the wall and the remains of the arch. Farther on, we mined our way until, when at a distance of 53 feet from the temple wall, we made the grand discovery, which was to throw all controversy on Jerusalem topography into a new groove, to upset many hitherto cherished theories. It was no less than the pier of that great arch the springing of which above ground Dr. Robinson had first perceived to be anything more than a projecting stone in the face of the wall, and which he supposed to have stretched right across the valley to the opposite side, joining the upper city to the temple. Warren subsequently dug a series of 7 shafts to the west at regular intervals, yet found no evidence of additional piers. He concluded, "Now we have ascertained that this arch was not one of a series reaching across the valley to the upper city, and so far Dr. Robinson was mistaken." Only during Benjamin Mazar's excavations between 1968 and 1977 was it discovered that the pier was in fact the western support of a single great arch, carrying traffic up from Jerusalem's lower market area and over the Tyropean street to the Royal Stoa complex on the esplanade of the Mount. As for the eastern wall of the Temple Mount, overlooking the Kidron Valley, there was the so-called Golden Gate, walled up by the Sultan of Egypt, Saladin, in the year 810. It was rebuilt by Suleiman the Magnificent in 1541, along with the Ottoman Turkish walls we see today, resting on top of the Herodian ashlars. It was described by Warren as follows. "The Golden Gate, the old foundations of which are still in situ, is found to form a continuation of the double walk of the northern cloister on the east, just as the Arch of Robinson led from the royal or southern cloisters to the west. Through it, one could see the high priest who burned the heifer and his assistants going out to the Mount of Olives." Then there's the southern end of the temple complex, which has, since the reunification of Jerusalem in 1967, been thoroughly excavated. Rows of shops still visible were constructed along the base of the temple platform on several sides. We also see the remains of the great double gates and the triple gates that once served as the entrance via underground ramps to the upper court of the Gentiles. On the west side of the Temple Mount, there were 2 more of these passageways. A monumental staircase led up to them. Additionally, there was a large ritual bath complex for those ascending to the holy precincts, fed by an aqueduct that led all the way from Bethlehem. On the southwestern corner of the Temple Mount, the priests would signal the beginning of the Sabbath by blowing a horn. A limestone inscription that fell into the valley below during the Roman destruction of the city was uncovered during modern excavations. It reads in Hebrew, "Lebet Hatikiyah," to the house of trumpeting. Some point to this as evidence that Hebrew was in fact a living language in that day, not only Aramaic as it's often assumed. As with every other aspect of biblical archaeology, there is ample controversy about the temple, including its precise location. Meteorologist and minister Ernest L. Martin argued that the temple was not located on the Temple Mount at all, but on a southern promontory. Martin claims his theory is consistent with excavations done both outside and within the great temple platform, known in Arabic as the Haram es-Sharif, or Noble Sanctuary. He notes that Sir Charles Warren meticulously examined all the nooks, crannies, holes, cisterns, and tunnels beneath the Haram and found no archaeological remains identified with the Second Temple. Not everyone is impressed by Martin's renderings. From 1973 to 1978, Dr. Leon Rittmeyer served as the lead architect associated with the archaeological excavations of the Haram's south walls. Rittmeyer charges that Martin ignores the archaeological evidence. If the Temple Mount was merely a Roman camp, as Martin argues, why have Hebrew inscriptions such as trumpeting stone been found at the base of the Haram walls? Also from Herod's day is the remarkable Caiaphas ossuary, which bears an inscription identifying the owner as the son of Caiaphas, who was high priest at the time of Jesus. The sides of this ossuary mimic the Herodian masonry found on the Temple Mount. Further to the southwest of the Temple Mount was Herod's enormous palace complex. Today, it has been converted into a museum known as the Citadel. On its northern end were three massive towers, Phasael, Hippicus, and Miriamne, named in honor of Herod's brother, his close friend, and his wife, whom he had murdered. Only the base of the Hippicus Tower has survived, on top of which the so-called Tower of David was later built, though of course King David had nothing to do with it. But perhaps the most intriguing site in Jerusalem's old city is the so-called Herodian Quarter, exposed after the Six-Day War during excavations in the area. Among its underground ruins are burnt priestly villas, providing evidence of the fire that occurred in Jerusalem a month after the destruction of the temple. The discoveries include spectacular mosaics and artwork, lounges for hosting family and friends, ancient household utensils, and ritual immersion baths. There's even a haunting wall carving depicting the temple's menorah, said to be engraved by the temple's high priest, and quite different from the traditional menorah we know from the Arch of Titus in Rome. What then did the real menorah look like? Finally, we should consider the sifting project that began in 1999 when the northern branch of the Islamic movement conducted renovations on the south end of the Haram es-Sharif and disposed of over 9,000 tons of dirt mixed with ancient artifacts. It was all dumped as garbage in the nearby Kidron Valley. In a bold move, archaeologists Dr. Gabriel Barkay and Zachi Dvira retrieved the discarded material, and in 2004, they started sifting it. While the project's finds have been wrenched out of their archaeological context, certainly not in situ, they constitute the first ever archaeological data originating from below the Temple Mount's surface. The finds from the First Temple period range from the 10th century BCE until the destruction of Solomon's Temple in 586 BCE. They include an abundance of pottery, including jugs, juglets, fragmented terracotta figurines, stone slingshots, shekel stone weights, arrowheads, and other artifacts. From the Second Temple period, actual opus sectile floor tiles from the Temple Mount courts were discovered among the rubble. Additionally, the sifting project has uncovered more than 5,000 coins, ranging from tiny silver Persian period coins from the 4th century BCE until modern times. The first coin recovered was minted during the Great Revolt against the Romans in 66 and 67 CE. It bore the phrase, "For the freedom of Zion," and was particularly meaningful since the Temple Mount was one of the focal points of the fighting. Also found was an extremely rare silver coin minted during the revolt. Its face features a branch of 3 pomegranates and an inscription, Yerushalayim Kedoshah, Holy Jerusalem. The reverse of the coin features a cup with the writing Chatzi HaShekel, half shekel. Such coins were used to pay the temple tax during the revolt. But nothing evokes both the defiance and the tragedy of that revolt more than the greatest and most melancholy monument from the Herodian age, a rocky promontory in the wilderness of Judea, whose name reverberates across the last 2 millennia. Masada. Stay tuned.